Hail, hail, Hatshepsut and her glorious regime! Hello everyone, I'm Megan Sullivan and welcome to History and Games, the audio and video series where I play historical fiction games and talk about the real history hidden inside these wonderful games. Today, in honor of the recent release of Sid Meier's Civilization VII, I'm talking all about Hatshepsut and her fascinating history, while sharing my impressions of the PC version of Civ VII so far. Remember, if you like this type of content and haven't already done so, please like and subscribe to History and Games. It really helps me out. Also, apologies in advance if I muddle some of these names. The Egyptians didn't bother writing down vowels, so there's no consensus on how to pronounce ancient Egyptian names, at least not in English. Plus, they're just hard for me to say. So, a quick explanation of what Civ VII is. Sid Meier's Civilization VII is a 4X turn-based strategy game developed by Firaxis and published by 2K. The idea is to build up a historical civilization over different eras and make it the best civilization there is. Now, you might think the only way to win is through military conquest, and that is one way, but there are a range of possible victory conditions, which include having the most culturally sophisticated or technically advanced civilization. It's really up to you how you want to win. Now, each entry of civilization is slightly different, and Civ VII is no exception. Instead of guiding a single country through the ages, now you'll be guiding a single leader through the ages. In other words, once an age ends, you'll be forced to pick a new civilization with new stats and abilities. The good news is you can pick a civilization that is similar to the previous one you played as, and you don't have to match a world leader to the country they're normally associated with. For example, I could have Hatshepsut be ruler of ancient Persia, an empire that existed 8,000 years after her rule as Egyptian pharaoh. This new feature opens up even more routes to victory, which is pretty cool. For the sake of this episode, though, I decided to have Hatshepsut remain ruler of Egypt so I could talk about her history and whether or not the developers at Firaxis successfully weave that history into the gameplay mechanics. Alright, let's dig into the past. Hatshepsut, which means something like foremost of noble women, was born about 1500 BCE during the 18th Pharaonic dynasty of ancient Egypt. She was the daughter of King Thutmose, Thutmose, and Queen Amose, and was half-sister to Thutmose II, whom she was forced to marry in order to keep power in the family line. When her father died, a young Hatshepsut, thought to be around 14 years old, became queen to now King Thutmose II. As queen, she inherited the position of God's wife, or more specifically, God's wife of Amun, a title given to the high priestess of Amun, also pronounced Aman or Amen. Again, Egyptian writing didn't bother with vowels. We don't know what her specific duties to the supreme god of the Egyptians entailed, but we do know it was an extremely important and powerful position. By the way, I love that Hatshepsut's unique ability in Civ VII is called God's Wife of Amun. It's a clear nod to her very real and very important function as a high-ranking priestess. At any rate, Hatshepsut became queen very early in her life, and not long after this, she gave birth to 2 daughters, though only one survived into adulthood. Unfortunately, she and her husband never had a son, and Thutmose's heir, Thutmose III, ended up being his son by a minor concubine. Since his reign was relatively short, we don't know much about Thutmose II. We only know that he died young, around 30 years old, or maybe even a bit younger, and that Hatshepsut was made queen regent until her infant stepson came of age. However, just a few years after being made regent, Hatshepsut decided to take full control of Egypt's destiny and name herself pharaoh, a traditionally male-only role. To be fair, she had precedent. A queen from the 12th Pharaonic dynasty named Sobek-Neferu also made herself pharaoh. Thus, upon officially making herself pharaoh, Hatshepsut took the throne name Ma'at Kare, which means truth is the soul of Ra, or Re. Again, no vowels. Meanwhile, her other royal name, Her Horus name was Retkau, or possibly Useretkau, meaning the might of souls. Hatshepsut then ordered artisans to portray her in traditional pharaonic dress, including a false beard, on her statues, though she insisted they keep her female pronouns. That way, history would know that one of the greatest pharaohs of Egypt was in fact a woman. By the way, several of these statues survive in museums today. You'll notice that Hatshepsut is portrayed as small. She may have been only 5 feet tall and slender, with wide, high cheekbones. She's extremely young and pretty, and considering Hatshepsut came to power in her 20s, these statues may be more than just an idealized version of her. And I give credit to Fur Access for not only successfully capturing her likeness in Civ VII, but for adding a couple of cool details to her outfit. For example, notice that over her white gown is a beaded net. This is a shout out to the real Egyptian beaded nets found in numerous Egyptian tombs. They're absolutely stunning fashion statements, with the oldest surviving net dress being about 4,500 years old. Also, notice the wide beaded collar, another exquisite example of Egyptian high fashion. If you're gonna be a good pharaoh, you gotta look good doing it. And Hatshepsut does. But though she certainly looked the part, Hatshepsut initially had a hard time convincing people she had the right to rule. Never mind that she wasn't the first female pharaoh, or that she outranked her stepson, who was the son of a minor concubine whose father was the son of a minor concubine, while Hatshepsut was the daughter of a queen and a pharaoh. Apparently, none of that mattered to the nobility, who hated the idea of a female ruler. If the pharaoh was going to stay on the throne, she was going to have to brush up her resume. And so she began to promote a story in which the god Amun visited her mother Queen Amose in the middle of the night and impregnated her with Hatshepsut. This meant that the new female pharaoh was a demi-goddess, one with the personal blessing of her all-powerful father Amun, who by the new kingdom had been synchronized with the sun god Ra, or Re, to become Amun-Ra, king of the entire Egyptian pantheon. You can't get a better recommendation than that. And so Hatshepsut was allowed to stay on the throne. But what kind of queen was she? Although at one point the pharaoh did send military forces to both Nubia and Canaan, her nearly 20-year reign was largely peaceful. It was during this time that Egypt re-established major trade routes lost in previous centuries, and even established new ones. This made Hatshepsut very cosmopolitan. For example, she was familiar with the merchants of Byblos in the Levant and the Minoans of Crete, the predecessors of Homer's heroic Achaeans, whom he also called the Danans, translated in Egyptian as Thanaja. And in fact, it was during the reign of her successor, Thutmose III, that the first direct trade link was made between the Egyptian pharaohs and Homer's heroes. Hatshepsut's most famous trading partner, however, was much further south than the Greeks. During her reign, the pharaoh sent a successful sailing expedition to the land of Punt, thought to be the area around modern-day Ethiopia. There ruled a queen named Ati, and it seems that Ati was willing to trade with her fellow female ruler, because when the pharaoh's expedition came home, their trading vessels were overflowing with an impressive amount of valuable goods, including over 30 live myrrh trees, ebony, ivory, apes, dogs, monkeys, panther skins, and a good amount of frankincense, which could be charred, ground up, and used as eyeliner. The reason we know about this successful expedition is because it's commemorated in a relief found in the mortuary temple of Hatshepsut at Deir al-Bahri, which is a complex of mortuary temples and tombs located on the west bank of the Nile River near Luxor, then known as Thebes, or at least the Greeks called it Thebes, possibly after one of the local ceremonies called the Gathering of the Thrones, or Hatshepsut. At any rate, this stunning building, called Djeser Djeseru, or the Holy of Holies by the Egyptians, is built into the side of a nearby cliff and can be reached via a series of long ramps once surrounded by colonnades and beautiful gardens. At nearly 100 feet tall, the temple is still impressive and a testament to the good taste of Hatshepsut and her personal steward and architect Sedenmut or Senmut, again, no vowels, who might have also been her lover, although that's never been proven. Nonetheless, he was clearly a favorite of the pharaoh, who showered him with dozens and dozens of titles. And he might have deserved them all, because Hatshepsut ordered so many monuments built that the only other pharaoh in all of ancient Egypt to build more monuments was Ramesses II, who reigned for nearly 70 years. These monuments were almost always religious in nature, and they were always impressive. Wanting her name to be read far and wide, you can still see Hatshepsut's name atop one of the massive obelisks she commissioned to be placed outside the temple of Mut, the goddess consort of her divine father Amun, at Karnak. This was spectacular advertising. Nobody was going to rob her of her glory. And here I want to again praise Firaxis for their historical attention to detail, because Hatshepsut's agenda in Civilization VII is to build lots and lots of wonders. This agenda, called Wonders of Iteru, Iteru being one of the Egyptian names for the Nile River, causes Hatshepsut to like world leaders more when they have less wonders than her, or like them less if they have more wonders than her. I also like that Hatshepsut's leader bonus gives her 15% more production power if she constructs buildings and wonders near navigable rivers. It makes sense considering that all major construction projects in ancient Egypt are right alongside the riverbanks of the Nile. Hatshepsut also gets a +1 culture boost for every resource imported into her empire. This is a clever wink to the pharaoh's successful trading expeditions around the Mediterranean and other parts of Africa. Since I'm a big coward and wanted to go the culture route instead of the world domination route in Civ VII, Hatshepsut's agenda fits my agenda quite nicely. More on that later. It's clear from her constant need to advertise that the aristocracy still wasn't happy with a woman claiming the male title of pharaoh. They were even less happy that she had elevated a man of humble birth, i.e. Senmut, to a high-ranking position. Who was this upstart bachelor from a poor family? Why did he need so many titles? And why was he in charge of tutoring the pharaoh's daughter? The nobles didn't like any of it. Or maybe they didn't like the fact that Hatshepsut refused to share power with a kid. Not that she entirely ignored her stepson. There are depictions of them together in iconography, though it's clear who's in charge. And she did marry her daughter to her stepson, although that might have been a way to ensure that even if the pharaoh was eventually kicked off the throne, she would still be mother to a queen. So it's not like she hated her stepson or anything. In fact, she gave him the chance to achieve glory for himself. Sometime around 1460, the pharaoh elevated her teenage stepson to the status of general and sent him forth to put down a rebellion in Megiddo, all the way over in the Levant. Granted, this might have been a way to get him out of her hair, and it wouldn't be surprising if Hatshepsut was hoping that Mose would, fall in battle. But as it turned out, her stepson was a bit of a military prodigy, as he would prove in later decades. Not that any of this really mattered, because time was running out for the nearly 50-year-old pharaoh. A mummy identified as Hatshepsut, although there's still some debate about this identification, shows signs of diabetes and cancer. But the thing that might have actually killed her was an abscess that followed the removal of a tooth. Whatever the cause of death, Hatshepsut's glorious reign came to an end, which left Thutmose III completely in charge. And it seems he wasn't a fan of his stepmother, because not long after her death, her shrines were mutilated and her obelisks and monuments were torn down. It seems that Mose and his later male descendants were determined to erase Hatshepsut's existence, and for thousands of years, her name was lost to history. And yet, stories about her survived. Ancient authors like Josephus and Julius Africanus mention a pharaoh named Amensis in their Egyptian kings list, who reigned for a little over 20 years during the 18th dynasty. Not only does this fit the time frame of the female pharaoh's reign nicely, but the name Amensis sounds an awful lot like Amunsat, or Amun's daughter, one of Hatshepsut's royal titles. Some even argue she's mentioned in the Bible as either the Queen of Sheba or the Egyptian princess who found Moses along the banks of the Nile, but there doesn't seem to be any consensus on this. At any rate, her proper name was lost to history until the early 19th century when the Rosetta Stone was deciphered and archaeologists were able to read hieroglyphics. Once this happened and her mortuary temple and monuments were newly examined, Hatshepsut was brought back to life. And not only can you see her likeness in museums all over the world today, you can even play as a famous female pharaoh. So what is it like playing as Hatshepsut? Well, in order to align my history lesson with the actual gameplay, I decided to guide Hatshepsut through the age of antiquity as an Egyptian pharaoh and see how things played out. It took me a little over 4 hours and 100 turns to complete this specific era. I'll report on Exploration Age and Modern Age in a future episode. And so far, Hatshepsut's digital reign has been quiet? I admit I'm still somewhat of a noob when it comes to Sid Meier's civilization, so I tend to play very cautiously. And I admit I spent a lot of my turns building up a tiny army and navy, in case my neighbors were not very neighborly. This stems from both my time in Civ VI, where I was constantly being attacked by barbarians, and the fear that one of my closest neighbors, Rome, was going to start trouble. Historically, it's what the Romans do. And sure enough, Augustus and his men were sniffing around my territory, as was Catherine the Great. By the way, I love that in Civ, world leaders born leagues and years apart can just randomly bump into each other on a regular basis. At any rate, since I wanted to focus on culture and not military conquest, I used Civ VII's new currency, influence, to keep all my neighbors on side, and even convince them to open up their markets so I could do more trading and get more culture points. Also, I kind of wanted to do the whole diplomatic route because my leader isn't interested in war and doesn't get any bonuses from it. But because I never went to war, at least not yet, I didn't need my little army, at least not in the Antiquity Age. I'm serious. My general just stood around picking his nose, my foot soldiers ended up being part-time scouts, by the way I like the new scouting ability that lets them see just a bit further out, and my one warship basically just cruised around aimlessly. I can't say this was very exciting, but it was nice I could build up my nation in peace. During peacetime, I mostly focused on feeding my population and keeping them happy by selecting tiles with good overall yields for produce and ore and stuff. I don't think I quite met all the objectives for the new Silk Road Economic Legacy Path, which is a new feature that gives you specific age-related objectives, but then again, I'm still trying to figure out the deeper mechanics of the game. The problem is that outside of an advisor, which constantly prodded me to spend my influence in gold whenever it built up, there are no useful tooltips available right now, and the user interface is pretty bare bones. So right now, I'm learning by doing. And according to my stats, I'm not doing a great job of it, although Hatshepsut is hanging in there. For example, at the end of each age, there's a series of natural disasters like floods and war and crime, but Egypt managed to weather these storms pretty well. And the peace and prosperity of Egypt has allowed me to zoom in and watch my little cities and towns build up. I really like the animation for building things like pyramids, and the buildings, topography, and people all look great. The soundtrack is pretty darn good too. I just wish that Hatshepsut had a little more to say. On that same note, I wish we heard more from the narrator, Gwendolyn Christie, because she's amazing, but she doesn't have much to say either. At any rate, I apologize that I can't speak more on specific gameplay features right now, as I haven't really mastered them yet or even gotten to use them yet. But I think I'll have more to say as I guide Hatshepsut through the Exploration Age. What will she discover? Let's find out together. Thanks so much for supporting History and Games, guys. See you later.